Hi, welcome to week 4 of theory and practice of group work. Today, or this week, what we're concentrating on is both the looking at counselling groups and how we work with particular forms of therapy and modalities of therapy to help us work with groups in a counselling scenario and to offer therapy to particular groups. And then the other side of this week is particularly focusing on the group proposal, how you form a proposal to form a group, and that will be something that obviously works towards our first assignment, first piece of assessment for this course as well. So we'll kind of cover both of those, both in my little talk today, and then also in the workshop we'll do some pretty practical stuff to do with that as well. So just, I guess, looking at, first of all, the counselling groups. Chapter 4 of the textbook has some fantastic information about a number of different modalities that can be used very well in a group setting. So I'm going to get you to make sure that you read through those. I'm not going to cover them so much in this particular introduction, but we will have a good look at those and explore those as part of the workshop tomorrow. One example I wanted to give is a particular course that I've run over many years, which is called the Dad Factor, or we've changed it around to the name of it occasionally to Being Dad Factor. But anyway, it's a particular course around parenting, aimed particularly, obviously, at fathers. And what was a guiding factor for that particular course that I learnt from some good mentors who I started teaching the course with, is that we used the acceptance commitment therapy principles, particularly for that course. And so over the weeks of the course, we cover normal kind of parenting things, how to deal with negative behaviour, how to build confidence in children, what's it mean to be a father, circle of security, the whole attachment theory, how to deal with stress, all those kind of things. But in each week, what we also added in was we used the acceptance commitment therapy principles as a key, I guess, guiding force for a guide for how we ran the course and how we kind of listened and how we interacted with the people in the group. So some of the key principles of ACT, which is short for acceptance commitment therapy, was first of all a thing we call workability. Which is just the question around any sort of behaviour or thoughts that people have, does it work for you? And in a parenting sense, particularly in a parenting sense where a lot of the parents who often came to these things were kind of told to be there by the Department of Child Protection and or courts. So often there was a lot of, lack of responsibility and or quite vehement against the people who had told them to be there, who had obviously either taken their kids or was making it hard for them to see their children. And so when all that behaviour was brought up, one of the questions we would always ask was, well, how's that work for you? If you are really, really angry with the caseworker that you've got, does it work for you? Does it help you get your kids back? And generally the question was no. And so it gave us a good platform then to kind of go, well, regardless if it's fair or it's not fair, let's try and work towards what you want to do, what you want to achieve, which is to see your kids and get your kids back. As part of that too, though, we talked about, like, one of the other principles of ACT is that you actually give meaning to things. Things don't necessarily just define you. So it's an invitation to take responsibility for your actions and for what you can do and what's within your control, which is an empowerment. But again, responsibility can often be seen in some of these settings as a negative thing, taking responsibility, that you're told to take responsibility. Whereas we reshaped it as a, well, this is an empowering thing for you. You take responsibility. It's within your power. And one of the questions we've particularly asked in that is that there was often the talk about, well, I'll be happy when I get my children back. As we always said, well, okay, so you get your children back, but what do your children get from you? What do they get as a parent? So let's look at not so much that they're going to make you happy, but how are you going to deal with them? How are you going to make them happy? How are you going to build these things into their lives that help them thrive and build confidence and be happy and understand boundaries and grow and develop and all those things? Because that's actually your role. It's not your children's role to make you happy, and so we utilise that as another form of guidance within all the material that we used. And then I guess the other side of things that we added in was to move towards or allow the people to see or discover what they really valued about being a parent, particularly in this scenario. So, what do you value? And one of the questions we used for that was, if you as a parent, could overhear your children talking about you and your parenting in 30 years' time. So they're all grown up, they're sitting in a room somewhere, they're talking about your parenting, and they don't know you're there. What would you like them to be saying? So we threw that question, we throw that in quite early, and we refer to it along the way, because it's a values question. It's a question to say, well, what do you value? What do you want to get out of this parenting thing? What do you want to put into this parenting thing? And then we asked a second question that goes along with it, and this is the commitment part of. So the first part is around values, which is around acceptance, I guess. Accepting what you can do or what you value, and the second part of it is the commitment, the committed action aspect, where we say, okay, what are you going to put in place now to make sure that happens in 30 years' time? So rather than it being just this is my dream and it should just happen, it's saying, well, actually, no, it's not going to just happen. You need to act upon that, to put things in place, behaviours, ways that you deal with your own stress, etc., with your own anger, with your own frustration, maybe, and positive things. What positive parenting aspects can you put in place, and growth in your own skills that will mean down the track in 30 years' time, your kids will be saying that because you've done the hard work and you've committed the action to it. And so that's just a bit of an example about how you can utilise, even in a group that's actually not set up as an acceptance commitment therapy group, but set up as a parenting group, but you can utilise those principles of that particular kind of therapy to act as both your guide and your points of accountability for the way that you're running the group. And I think that's one of the key things for me, of the strength of using a modality or understanding a particular form of therapy, is it guides and allows you to always come back to a point of accountability, that you're running the group for a particular purpose, and allows you to stick to that purpose. It's not just kind of throwing a whole lot of information together and hoping that it all pans out. It's having a process to do with that information that then guides, of course, things we've talked about in the last few weeks, how you set up the group dynamics and those kind of things, how you deal with the group dynamics, and all the different areas of how a group forms, etc. It gives you a lovely framework, and then accountability to that framework to be able to do that. We'll look at, like I said in the workshop, at some of the other modalities that are present in Chapter 4. So please read through Chapter 4 before we start that, and we'll have a good look at those tomorrow. I guess the other thing that I've put up on the website, that is another form of a therapy group that I've always found fascinating. I only sort of came across it a couple of years ago, through a movie that was called Healing Voices. And Healing Voices was a movie that followed a number of people for a number of years who had a situation of hearing voices as part of their, well, I suppose that they had diagnosed psychotic illnesses is the way that it gets defined within the medical world. But this group of people, I guess, it's challenging that notion as to whether, you know, psychotic illness is something that just needs to be medicated to be fixed. They've come up with an idea of peer support being integral to a quality of life that often people don't experience when they're under heavy medication with diagnosed illnesses such as schizophrenia and post-traumatic stress disorder, where that's one of the situations is that you hear voices. And so I've put down the director's comment about what the movie's about, and then also the a clip of one of the parts of the movie, like a full clip of one of the stories. And one of the interesting things is they use groups. And you'll see in the clip that they utilise these peer support groups, which kind of started meeting as almost like an underground in people's basements type scenario, where people who heard voices would come together to support each other. And there's actually a whole network of these things that have been formed over time into what they call the Hearing Voices Network. Well, that's the predominant name across the world that they give to this particular movement. And despite what you think about, you know, the pros and cons of medication versus this peer support therapy, what I'm interested in is in this particular setting is that it's groups that form that create the support that's needed. And they'll talk quite significantly about these groups and the power of these groups that actually in their own right, because of the peer support and the understanding and the empathy that these people can offer to each other because they're all experiencing a similar thing, that is the therapy in itself. And so I've asked you to have a good look at the actual, there's a good section on the website that I've linked in there around the Hearing Voices Network around forming groups. And, you know, particularly I think some of the information that's in there gives a really good handle when you're thinking of a group proposal, because it covers significantly, as the textbook does in group chapter 5 as well. But this website goes through, you know, why you set up a group, all the different aspects that you have that you take into account when setting up one of these Hearing Voices Network groups. And so there's some flexibility within what the group might look like. There's also some really strong accountability and great frameworks that they encourage you to think through before setting one up. And I think, again, terrific information, terrific thought process that you can start thinking through in terms of your own group proposal as well. You know, what are the key elements that you put into the group? So it's not just a group for group's sake, but it's about what you know, what do you want to achieve from setting this group up and having people meet, you know, around the information that and the therapies that you're utilizing. You know, what's the purpose of this thing? What are you trying to achieve? How are you going to try and achieve it? So have a good look at those. There's a whole section there around setting up groups as part of the Hearing Voices Network. And look through all the different sections that are in there too, to give yourself a good handle upon that whole section of group proposal. And certainly tomorrow in the workshop as well, we'll work towards actually starting to look at starting to work together to form little proposals and get a bit of practice at that, which will, you know, help in terms of understanding that assessment coming up. At the back of the book too, in chapters 10 and 11 of the textbook, the Corey Schneider Corey textbook, there is some fantastic guides there too for forming proposals for a whole range of different groups, both in school and community settings. So again, have a browse. Yeah, chapter 4 and 5 are the key areas I've asked you to read, but also 10 and 11, have a bit of a browse through them, and we'll play around with those tomorrow too, to give us some good ideas as to what goes into a group proposal. So that's about it for this week. Really looking forward to the workshop tomorrow, where we'll cover those aspects I've just talked about. So yeah, have a good look through those clips that I put up. Have a good read of the textbook as well for those particular chapters, and we'll use those as our kind of key points to guide our workshop tomorrow. So we'll see you then. Thank you.